The sun rose just like any other morning, casting a soft golden light over the neatly trimmed lawns of our quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped, sprinklers ticked rhythmically, and the smell of fresh-cut grass floated through the air. My wife, Laura, had stepped outside early, coffee in hand, to tend to her flower bed, her favorite part of the morning. It was her way of finding peace, pulling a few weeds here, misting the roses there, humming to herself like she always did. I was inside, sipping my own coffee, flipping through the news, not a care in the world. We had built a life of calm, of routine, and in a world that felt increasingly unpredictable, this pocket of normalcy was something we cherished. Then came the sound, muffled at first, raised voices, sharp and angry, followed by a loud thud. I paused, thinking it was nothing more than a neighbor's dispute or a delivery truck gone rogue. But then I heard her. Laura's voice, not her usual playful tone, but sharp, frantic, and laced with fear. I dropped my mug, the ceramic shattering across the kitchen tile, as I bolted for the door. Just outside our picket fence, 3 men in plain polo shirts with HOA badges were shouting, one of them pushing Laura back from the garden. Her wide eyes locked with mine, silently begging for help. In that moment, something primal surged through me. The stillness of my civilian life shattered. They didn't know who I was, what I had trained for, what I had survived. They saw a quiet man in slippers, but they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And what they had just done would be the biggest mistake of their lives. I've never been one to talk much about my past. Around here, most people just see me as the guy who waves politely, keeps his lawn trimmed, and minds his own business. That's the way I prefer it. I didn't move to this neighborhood to stand out or make a statement. I came here to disappear, to find peace. After 20 years in the special forces, I've had my fill of chaos, of adrenaline, of violence. I've seen things most people couldn't imagine. I've walked into hell with nothing but a rifle and my brothers beside me, and I've walked out when others didn't. That kind of life leaves marks, not all of them visible. So when I retired, I made a promise to myself. No more battles unless they come to my doorstep. But just because I left the battlefield doesn't mean it left me. The training, the discipline, the instincts, they don't fade. They settle deep into your bones, become part of how you breathe, how you move, how you read people and situations in a split second. I can tell when someone's about to lie. I can see when a crowd is about to turn violent. I notice the things most people overlook. A twitch in the hand, a shift in the stance, a glance that lasts a second too long. And I've kept my skills sharp. Some men fish or golf when they retire. I keep a private range out in the county, and a home gym that would make a young soldier jealous. Not because I'm paranoid, because I believe in being prepared. Nobody around here knows that. To them, I'm just another aging veteran with a quiet smile and a weathered face. That's fine. I don't need recognition. But the day those HOA enforcers laid hands on my wife, they didn't just assault an innocent woman. They woke up a man they never should have provoked. They thought they were the authority, thought they could push people around with impunity. They thought I'd back down, call the police, let the system handle it. They had no idea what kind of man they were dealing with. But they were about to find out. When we first moved into the neighborhood, the Homeowners Association seemed harmless enough. Just a few people making sure the lawns were kept up, and no one painted their house an outrageous color. It felt like a small price to pay for the peaceful streets and sense of order. But it didn't take long before I noticed something off. There was a tone in the HOA president's voice that didn't sit right with me. Too firm, too smug, like he enjoyed the authority more than he should. His name was Carl, short guy with a clipboard always in hand, always finding something wrong. He didn't lead, he policed. The first warning was about our mailbox. It was apparently 2 inches too tall. Then it was a notice about the type of mulch my wife used. Not in compliance with neighborhood standards, they said. At first we laughed it off, but the letters kept coming. Small infractions, ridiculous citations, threats of fines. Then came the mandatory inspection, where 3 of them, including Carl, walked our property without permission and left a detailed report in our mailbox, complete with photographs. That's when I started paying closer attention. Neighbors whispered about them, about the fines people paid for things like leaving their trash bins out a few minutes too long, or putting up a flag without prior written approval. One family got fined for having a basketball hoop near the driveway. Another had their Christmas lights ripped down. No warning, just gone. No one spoke out loud, not publicly. The fear was subtle but real. People were afraid of retaliation. The HOA had become more than an oversight committee. It was a gang wearing badges and armed with bylaws. Carl wasn't alone. He had a few enforcers, guys like Mitch and Ray, who weren't just HOA board members, but self-appointed watchdogs. They strolled the neighborhood with that look of superiority, like they owned the streets. They'd stand outside homes, taking pictures, jotting things in notebooks. My wife once caught one of them peering over our fence, trying to get a glimpse of the backyard. When she confronted him, he just smirked and walked away. We tried to play nice. We went to the meetings. We voiced concerns politely, but nothing changed. If anything, it got worse. I started to realize they targeted us on purpose, maybe because we didn't suck up to them, maybe because I didn't smile enough at Carl's jokes. Whatever the reason, we were on their list. And with every petty citation, every veiled threat, they chipped away at the peace we had come here to find. Still, I kept my calm. I didn't want to bring my past into this. I didn't want to be that guy. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before they crossed a line they couldn't come back from. And when they did, there would be no warning. No more polite emails. Just consequences. It started like any other Saturday. The sky was clear, the breeze light, and Laura was outside early, wearing her sun hat, humming softly as she worked on her flower bed near the sidewalk. She had just planted a row of lavender, her latest project to bring more color to the yard. I was inside finishing my second cup of coffee, watching her through the window. I remember thinking how peaceful she looked, how lucky I was to have her. That feeling didn't last long. Around 10, a white SUV pulled up just past our driveway. I noticed it right away. HOA emblem on the side. 3 men stepped out, Carl, Mitch, and Ray. Their faces were already tight with that self-important scowl they wore like a uniform. They didn't wave, didn't say good morning. They marched straight toward my wife like they had a mission. I stood up from the table, already uneasy. Something in their posture wasn't right. From the window, I saw Carl point at the flower bed. His lips were moving fast, his arms flailing. Laura, calm as ever, stood her ground. She tried to talk, probably explain that the bed was still within the easement, that it didn't block the sidewalk. But they weren't listening. Mitch stepped forward, reached into the flowers, and started pulling them out by the roots. That's when I moved toward the door. Before I could open it, I heard Laura's voice, sharp and high. "Stop! Don't touch me!" Then came a rustling sound and a loud thud. I froze for half a second. My heart slammed in my chest. Then came her scream, not of pain, but shock and fear. I grabbed my phone and sprinted outside. By the time I turned the corner, Ray had my wife by the upper arm, his grip tight enough to leave marks. Her hat was on the ground, her watering can spilled across the sidewalk. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She looked small next to them, surrounded, and she looked terrified. I shouted, but my voice barely registered with them. Carl turned, his expression smug, like they had every right to be there. like my presence didn't matter. That was the moment everything shifted inside me. Years of restraint, of trying to live like a civilian, snapped. This wasn't a disagreement over flowers. This was an assault. On my wife. On our peace. On the home I had built to protect her from the very ugliness now standing in our yard. Laura broke free and stumbled back toward me. She clutched my arm, shaking. Her whisper was almost too soft to hear. They said they were going to tear it all out. They pushed me. I looked at her, then back at them, calmly, coldly. And I knew this wasn't going to end with a complaint letter or a neighborly talk. Not this time. They had gone too far. The call came while I was in the garage, halfway through organizing some old gear. I'd left the door open to let the morning light in, the hum of the neighborhood acting as background noise. I remember picking up a pair of gloves when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I didn't expect anything urgent. It was Saturday after all. When I glanced down and saw Laura's name, I smiled reflexively and answered with a casual, "Hey, sweetheart." What I heard next made my blood run cold. Her voice trembled, barely above a whisper. "They're here. Carl and the others. They're yelling. They just grabbed me." Time stopped. I couldn't even hear the rest of what she said because my instincts had already taken over. I stood frozen for a second, listening to the panic in her breath. Not fear from inconvenience or embarrassment, but the kind that only comes from real danger. The kind I'd heard too many times overseas, in villages under siege, in voices calling for medevac in the middle of chaos. Except now, it was my wife, in our front yard. I didn't ask questions. I didn't try to calm her down. There was no time for that. "Go inside," I told her. "Lock the door, I'm coming." She said, "Hurry," and then the line cut out. I don't know if she hung up or if something happened. I just know the silence that followed rang louder than anything I'd heard in years. I put the phone in my pocket, and everything around me blurred into background. I was no longer in the suburbs. I was back in the field, focused, controlled, dangerous. I walked straight to the corner of the garage where my emergency gear sat, untouched, but always ready. My hands didn't shake. My mind didn't wander. Every step was methodical, trained. I moved with a clarity I hadn't needed in a long time. Because when you spend years preparing for worst-case scenarios, you learn that when they finally come, hesitation is your enemy. And now, the worst-case scenario had just shown up on my doorstep. They touched my wife. They made her afraid. And they had no idea who I really was. But they were about to find out. I moved through the garage like I was back in a forward operating base, prepping for a mission. The civilian world faded. There were no neighbors, no picket fences, no HOA rules, just threat assessment, timing, and precision. My heart wasn't racing, it was steady, controlled. There's a certain calm that settles over you when the training kicks in, when the body remembers what the mind doesn't need to say. I opened the heavy-duty storage case in the corner and pulled out the compact tactical vest I never thought I'd wear again. It still fit like a second skin. Everything I needed was legal, locked, and prepped. My primary was a licensed AR-15 I'd customized for home defense, not war. My sidearm, a Glock 19, holstered snug against my hip. I wasn't preparing for a firefight. I was preparing to defend. This wasn't vengeance. This was response. A line had been crossed, and my job was to ensure it didn't happen again. I grabbed a comms earpiece, not because I needed backup, but because I needed to hear everything. Even now, even under threat, my priority was de-escalation. But I also knew that the fastest way to peace was to be the one most prepared for war. My wife's voice still echoed in my head, the shake in it, the fear. That wasn't something I could forgive, not easily, not ever. As I checked the chamber, I ran through my options. These men weren't trained. They were bullies with clipboards. But that didn't mean they couldn't be dangerous, and that made them unpredictable. I couldn't treat this like a neighborly dispute. I had to treat it like a live situation. Non-lethal if possible. Final if necessary. I stepped out of the garage and into the blinding sunlight. From a distance, the neighborhood looked the same. Birds chirped, flags waved, dogs barked behind fences. But I saw none of it. My focus was ahead, on the men who dared to lay hands on my wife. They thought I was some retired guy with soft hands and a quiet voice. They thought wrong. I wasn't just bringing a weapon. I was bringing the weight of every mission, every loss, every promise I'd ever made to protect what was mine. And they were about to meet a version of me that I had hoped would never need to surface again. I spotted them near the park at the end of the cul-de-sac, just a few houses down from mine. Carl was barking orders at Mitch and Ray, pacing with that same irritating swagger, still talking like he was the law around here. My wife had retreated to the house, safe behind locked doors now, but the tension hadn't left me. I kept my movements controlled, casual enough not to spook anyone, but purposeful. The rifle stayed slung behind my back, not drawn. The pistol remained holstered. I wasn't looking for a shootout, but I wasn't going in blind either. As I approached, Carl noticed me first. His face shifted from smug confidence to something less certain. He probably saw the vest, the calm in my eyes, and the way I walked. Not like someone rushing in anger, but someone who had already measured the outcome. He raised a hand, trying to act like he still had the upper hand. "You're violating HOA codes by carrying weapons in a common area," he said, puffing his chest. "I suggest you disarm and speak to us like a neighbor." I stopped about 15 feet away. My voice was calm, steady. "You laid hands on my wife. You stepped on my property. You acted outside the law. You don't get to set the tone anymore." Mitch took a step forward, muscles tensing like he thought he could intimidate me. I didn't flinch. "You need to back off," he muttered. "I'll give you one warning," I said, raising my hand slowly, palm outward. "Leave this neighborhood right now. Go home, apologize to my wife, and pray the police handle this before I do." Ray tried to play tough, but his eyes betrayed him. He was sweating, shifting his weight like a man unprepared for consequences. The silence that followed was heavy. The sound of a lawnmower a block away, the chirp of birds. Even the wind seemed to pause. A few neighbors had come out onto their porches, phones in hand. This wasn't a private argument anymore. The whole neighborhood was watching. Carl opened his mouth again, trying to regain control. But I stepped forward, not fast, just enough to make him stumble back. My hand hovered near my holster, not drawing, just reminding him of what I carried and what I knew how to do. That was enough. He froze. "This isn't Afghanistan," Carl spat. "No," I said quietly. "This is my home, and you brought the fight here." That's when the flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. Someone must have called the cops. Maybe Laura, maybe one of the neighbors. The siren was low, but it cut through the air like a blade. The HOA goons looked at each other, uncertain for the first time. I stood tall, arms at my sides, calm as ever. By the time the officers stepped out of their cruiser, the men who had stormed my yard looked less like enforcers and more like cowards. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt something close to justice. The moment the police stepped onto the scene, everything shifted. The illusion of power Carl and his cronies had clung to evaporated in an instant. They straightened up, tried to look composed, but their eyes darted, their bravado crumbling with every step the officers took. One of the neighbors who had been recording quietly stepped forward and handed her phone to an officer, whispering something and pointing toward me. The officer gave a quick nod, then turned his attention to Carl and the others. They didn't expect that the entire confrontation had been caught on video. The yelling, the pushing, the moment Ray grabbed my wife's arm. They hadn't counted on bystanders standing up, on a community that had finally seen enough. But more than that, they hadn't expected me. They hadn't expected the man they thought was soft-spoken and retired to show up prepared, composed, and utterly in control. When the officer approached me, he was respectful, measured. "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" I laid it out plainly, with no embellishment. I described what I saw, what Laura had told me, and what the men had done. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. The officers took it seriously. Within minutes, Mitch and Ray were in handcuffs, charged with assault. Carl tried to protest, but one of the officers cut him off, citing the video evidence and the repeated complaints filed by others. As they were led away, Carl looked back at me with a mixture of disbelief and fear. That's when it hit him. He had underestimated the wrong man. This wasn't just about broken flowers or power games. This was about consequences, and for the first time, he was the one on the receiving end. In the days that followed, the neighborhood buzzed with quiet conversations and sideways glances. Word spread fast. The video made its rounds, not just among neighbors, but eventually on a local news site. It was clear, damning, and impossible to ignore. Carl, Mitch, and Ray became the cautionary tale of the town, bullies unmasked, stripped of their authority, and finally held accountable. Charges were pressed, and while the court would take its time, the court of public opinion delivered its verdict almost instantly. The HOA scrambled. Emergency meetings were held, board members resigned, and the entire structure was placed under review. A new president was appointed, someone who believed in transparency and community, not control. For the first time since we moved in, people started speaking up. Letters were written, testimonies shared, and neighbors who had been silent for years found their voices again. The fear had lifted. Laura took time to recover from the shock of it all. She's strong, stronger than most people know, but even strength can crack under pressure. I stayed close, never letting her feel alone, never letting her question her safety again. That was my job before, and it's still my job now. As for me, I didn't seek applause or recognition. I didn't want headlines or handshakes. I just wanted our peace back. And in a strange way, the chaos had brought clarity. It reminded everyone that sometimes the quietest houses hide the strongest defenders, and that no amount of petty power can stand against someone who's truly ready to protect what matters. Justice came, not in vengeance, but in truth. And that was enough. Let the rest of the world forget. This neighborhood never will. They thought I was just another quiet man, blending into the background, keeping to myself. But silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means watching, waiting, choosing peace until peace is no longer an option. They underestimated me because they didn't see the fire behind the calm, the years of training behind the steady hands. They thought they could intimidate, control, and harm without consequence. But when they crossed the line, they learned the truth. I didn't seek conflict, but I was ready for it. And now, they'll remember forever. The quiet ones are often the most dangerous when provoked.